we might just kick off. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your lunchtime with us if you're in Melbourne. My name's Melissa Yee, and I'm a consultant with Capire Consulting Group. And today I'll be hosting a conversation about engaging young people and what that looks like in a post-COVID future. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the custodians of the various lands that we're meeting on. To them, their elders, and anyone that's emerging in those communities, and for any First Nations people that are here with us today. For me, this is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I think that with Zooming, and for any of us that are in lockdown in Melbourne, it can be easy for us to forget where we are, and to acknowledge that and be mindful of our the connection of our work to the traditional owners of our land. So I'd encourage you to all look for opportunities through your work to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through your work. So I would now love to introduce our panellists. We have a great group today. So our first panellist is Akeer Garang. So Akeer is a South Sudanese community advocate and experienced youth justice professional. Her tertiary education and her experience in the Youth Referral and Independent Persons Program, Youth Law, AIMS, and the Consumer Action Law Centre have equipped her with the skills to engage with a range of topics, including the criminal justice system, human rights, and family violence. Whether she's advocating for improvements in mental health services, highlighting the effects of intergenerational cultural dissonance and trauma, socioeconomic disadvantage, or youth justice matters, Akeer is consistently and eloquently addresses community representation and the use of intersectional frameworks when addressing issues faced by migrant and refugee communities. So thanks, Akeer. We're really happy to have you. If you want to give everyone a wave.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Mel.
All right. Our second panelist is Ali Noura. So Ali is a young Lebanese Australian whose passion is connection, whether it's through the obscure origins of languages or how we boost mental health. His latest venture is Bridging Us, a co-design consultancy connecting young people and decision makers to drive change. Thanks for joining us, Ali, and give us a wave.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. And lastly, we have Mehak Sheikh. Mehak is a 24-year-old woman from the western suburbs of Melbourne and has always been an advocate for young people, women, and cultural diversity through community engagement since arriving in Australia in 2012. She's been involved in starting up, delivering, and participating in multiple community and youth engagement projects on a local, state, and national level. Her passion for identity, psychology, community engagement, and inclusivity has shaped her career in social entrepreneurship and advocacy, including being a first-time independent in the local elections. So thanks for being here with us, Mehak, and if you can give us a wave as well.
Thanks, Melissa, and good to see, well, I can't see everyone, but good to see my panellists and know there's so many people joining.
Yeah. All right. So for today's session, I'll be starting off by asking our panelists some of my burning questions, but we also want to hear from you in the audience. So we've got our Q&A box on the bottom of the screen and the chat if you're on a PC, and for other devices, it'll be up the top. And you can also vote on the questions that you want to hear more about by using the thumbs up. So please let us know. So we might kick off. So my first question is a simple one. We've read out your official bios, but I would really like for each of you to tell us about your areas of interest and your work in youth engagement, and also if you've been an engaged young person. So I might kick off with, let's start with Ali.
I had my fingers crossed I wouldn't be the first one. No, but happy to go, thank you. So I guess particularly in the youth engagement space, it was kind of a weird journey here, but I think I always say to people I kind of accidentally got into it, but I'm really happy to be here now. So my main areas of interest have primarily been across a bunch of different issues, but the main ones primarily in recent times have been mental health, particularly youth mental health and mental health within migrant refugee communities and the intersection between the two. And currently now, as I said in the introduction, so I currently run one of the directors of a co-design consultancy called Bridging Us, and our main focus is not so much on a particular issue, but rather across different organizations and policymakers, how do we help young people and decision makers work better together to actually co-design solutions, identify problems together? Because myself and co-founders and directors, we recognize that a really big problem is that the polarization between young people and decision makers, the lack of connection, the lack of communication, both in the language we use, but also the solutions that we develop, both from young people and decision makers. We often don't work together to do those, and then often those solutions that we produce are not the most effective, sustainable. And we really recognized, and we're very fortunate that myself and co-founders, we worked across so many different social issues and different organizations with both not-for-profit, government, community. And were fortunate enough to recognize that when we had seen those instances where young people decision makers could work together as equals, it was amazing what the solutions could be, because not only were the solutions addressing the issues that young people were facing, they were feasible financially, politically, and you actually had greater buy-in longer term action and solutions. And so that's something that we hope to come in, is kind of no pun intended of bridging us. We really do want to bridge the gap between young people and decision makers in an era where we feel like young people decision making are more polarized than ever and really need to come together to solve our biggest community issues.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. Some really exciting stuff in there. I might jump to you next, Mehak.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So my sort of journey with youth engagement also began as a participant, obviously. Like I was 16 or 17 when I had my first kind of, this is youth engagement moment. And that's when we moved to Australia. And at a local community centre, essentially, when I used to volunteer after school to do like these after school classes for children. And one of the team leaders came and talked to me and said, hey, have you heard about youth services? And have you ever engaged with them? And I was like, I didn't even know they exist, right? So I was like, yeah, I haven't, but this sounds really interesting and cool. And she sent me a flyer that they were doing some consulting for in Sunshine. At the time, VisiCares Hub looked a bit different, so they were redeveloping, they were making it a bit better, and they invited a bunch of young people to come and engage with them. And that's the first kind of time, or my earliest memory of going and having my say at something. And I didn't realize. In that moment, I was like, I'm just going to go do it because it's an opportunity. But I didn't realize the impact of it, and I didn't realize how it makes a difference. So that was my earliest kind of memory of being engaged as a young person. And then it kind of didn't stop from there. The person who was running that consultancy at the time, that consulting opportunity at the time, then invited me for something else, and it just kept going. So for me, it started with local government youth councils, and then it went to youth-focused organizations, and then to youth-led organizations. So in my kind of world today, I'm around a lot of other young people who are leading change. And I think we need both. We need them in the systems where they influence change, but we also need them outside of the systems leading new change. And I like to see myself really comfortable in between, or a conduit between those two worlds in terms of engaging young people. Yeah, and I think the one that really shifted for me in terms of the view of how we engage with young people is when I worked at a very similar consultancy to what Ali's talking about, that bring young people to the decision-making tables to co-design solutions. And they talked about how young people have lived experience, and that's expertise. And that was the first time where I thought, I don't actually need a degree in youth work to say I know something about being a young person, because I live that every single day. So that narrative was a real a click moment for me when someone said, no, Mehak, you have expertise because you live something every day. And I think that's really important. But it was also when they talked to us about, or when I first started understanding systemic change or systems change, and how various players in the system we operate through influence each other. And so, someone doing something quite far away from young people actually influences young people. You just have to make those connections. So that's how I think I got more and more invested in wanting to create opportunities to engage with young people and to be myself an engaged young person and demonstrate what's possible.
Totally. Thanks, Mehak. I love that idea of the experience of young people being valued in its own right, and being a young person is a position of expertise as well. All right, so lucky last, Akeer, would you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, definitely. Just fair warning, guys, I have terrible internet at the moment, so hopefully I don't cut out as I speak. But yeah, my first experience of youth engagement was actually a little bit different, I guess. It was through the YREP program, so that mouthful that Mal mentioned before, the Youth Referral and Independent Persons program. And this came at a time where young people in my community were really experiencing issues with crime and media and how they're representing those narratives. And I really felt powerless in terms of what I could do for young people in my community, and as being a young person as well in that community, how I could, change that perception. So what I did through that volunteership was actually being able to go to the police station and support young people during police interviews in terms of allowing them to, know their rights and ensure their welfare. But through that, I also got to hear their stories as well, and how these young people were so passionate about their experiences and about the systems that they were experiencing, and them really having the capacity to change the labels that they had been given around being, at risk or being disengaged. So I've really been working with that cohort of young people in giving them back power and taking power in their experiences. Like Mehak mentioned, that they are experts in their lives, and they are expert in what they've experienced, and they can actually use that experience to change systems and to have people listen and to think about different ways to approach things as well. So I've really enjoyed, having young people who typically aren't seen as change makers, who typically are kind of seen as on the skirts of society, really being uplifted and really being elevated in terms of their voice and their experiences. So that's my experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Akeer. I really love that, that concept of agency as well, and sort of owning your own language as well. So yeah, would love to hear more about that. And again, I'm just going to jump out to our audience and say, if you have any questions from our, our team of experts, please pop it in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll definitely get to it. So I might, we've heard a lot about kind of different ways to engage young people in projects. And we know that I work in community engagement. We know that the 35 to 60-year-old age bracket, easy, people are happy to have, their say. But we also have this idea of young people as being hard to reach. So from your experience, what is the best way to engage young people to contribute to these projects or government policies? So I might start again with you, Ali, and everyone else feel free to jump in.
Thank you. I think just listening to that in terms of, I think the biggest challenges, or one of the biggest challenges with engaging young people that I've noticed in the sector, or just broader with youth engagement, is often a sense of exclusivity. And what I mean by exclusivity is that we often have the same young people, over-engaged with the same young people. And the reason why this is the case in many instances is because those young people, like myself, I was very lucky, very privileged to have supportive family. I didn't have to worry too much about finances. I had adequate time to volunteer and be involved in organizations. The fact of the matter is most young people aren't in that boat. Many young people have to support themselves. They have to work full-time. Often they're studying full-time as well as working. So in many cases, we have to recognize that we have to make it easy for those, like all young people, and it's not just the same young people over and over again, because then we won't have a representative sample of young people we're engaging with. And so the key thing is, how do we create a sense of awareness so that all young people, and not just those who have spare time, can actually be involved? And I think that comes actually, how do we communicate that? And kind of that leads to the second challenge that I've seen, is often a sense of, in my instance, there's a lot of word of mouth, how we get involved. Like when I got involved, I was second year of uni, I was just working hospitality and retail, wasn't involved at all. And I'm like, I want to make a change. A friend of mine's like, oh, you should join the youth advisor group at the Centre for Multicultural Youth. I'm like, okay, cool. And then from there, then jumped into every it's a very close-knit sector. So I found out about all different organizations, got involved with mental health organizations, community organizations, government. I now knew who all the stakeholders were. But before that, it was night and day. I had no clue who was in the sector. I didn't know who I could reach out to. And that's another thing we have to recognize, is the sense of breaking, I guess, the awareness barrier between the sector, because it can be quite a close-knit sector. And often the public doesn't really know, and in this case, young people outside that don't know. So I think both in terms of exclusivity and a sense of this tight-knit sector, we need to, as organizations and a sector more broadly, to be able to actually communicate more effectively with that social media or broader community engagement, so that we're specifically targeting people who are not the natural people, or like the easy fruit to pick. Not the young people who are already invested in social issues and are already involved in 5-6 different organizations, and not young people within our own networks who are part of our colleagues from different organizations. We need to go straight to these young people who aren't in that, and it's a really key part to actually broadening youth engagement.
Thanks, Sally. I'm hearing some like agree noises from Mehak or Akeer. Did you have anything else you wanted to jump in, particularly around promotion, and how do we make sure? I mean, I love the school captains, I love the youth juries, but how do we make sure we're reaching everyone?
I agree with Ali so much in terms of it being quite exclusive, actually. I think as well, in terms of how we envision engagement, it's always been a sort of similar way. So it's speaking and writing. I think I've been to a lot of forums, I've submitted, into reports, but I think young people have a spectrum of skills that they can bring to the table. And I think it's about also being more open to different ways of engaging young people. The young people who are really creative, who might want to engage through spoken word, who want to engage through music and art. And I think really being open to take that on board and see the benefits of that sort of engagement as well, and being willing to incorporate it into that also very mainstream academic engagement as well.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that or capstone almost what both Ali and Akeer have said. I agree 100%. Like I often live by the motto that informed individuals are empowered individuals. So, tell people why they should care about something. Don't just tell them to care, because that's not good enough, right? And I think we've all been, and a really good example is we've all been inundated by like charity ads, if you like, that make you want, like, try to elicit an emotional response, but you burn out from that sort of stuff. So you really need to understand the why, like, why do you care about this, or why does this affect you? I think that makes a big difference. And also, I agree, like, the type of engagement, how many, and I can tell you a really recent example of policy, like a council was removing a policy and they wanted to consult the community on it. And it was like a really good, solid policy that we should be talking about on gender equity. And I was like, of course, young people should be in this conversation. But it was like a 60-page document that I was like, okay, I have to put 3 hours aside to read this, to understand it, and then like respond to 2 questions on a survey. So I was like, I'll have to take it on me to go and make a really simple presentation and send it to my friends and go like, look, these 4 pages is what you really should care about. Go and have a read. Here, the dot points. Here's some images and visuals. Like, I don't have to be doing that work. That should just kind of be like the part of the package. So how we put that information out there should be coming in a variety of ways. I know there's so many times I hear risk aversity from organizations, institutions about being on social media, I was like, I took my campaign to TikTok because that's where young people are. So let's engage with them, let's just be a little bit risk-taking, but cautious, but still, move out of our comfort zone a little and reach young people in an unusual way.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think also, like, we think about it being for young people. I mean, it's a lot of this stuff isn't just young people as well. I mean, I think of my role as that if I'm doing my job well and reaching lots of people, it's actually almost like translating that big chunky 60-page document into something that's usable and something that's kind of simplified into maybe a 1-pager. That's not just for young people. That's going to reach a broader audience, of course. So I guess that leads us into my next question, which is intersectionality, one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm going to start with Akeer, but I think that you're all going to have some opinions. So tell me, where does intersectionality fall into? How do we make sure that, all different people are represented?
Yeah, definitely. I think Ali definitely hit it on the head when he talked about class and socioeconomics. Volunteering, giving your free time is not accessible to everyone. And I think that we take for granted the fact that doing this work is a privilege that we kind of gatekeep in a lot of ways. So being conscious of that. But I think as well, as a young person who's is a refugee, I guess, and has come from that experiences of trauma, and being in spaces where people talk about my experiences without understanding how that may impact the people that are actually experiencing those things. Because when you have people in power who haven't lived through those experiences talking about those experiences, you tend to, alienate and disempower the people you're trying to engage. I think really being purposeful in trying to think about how trauma really intersects with engagement as well, and then being really informed in your approaches to engagement. If that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. I might just jump in, and I will jump across to Ali and Mehak. I was also sort of, I guess, with that from my perspective as an engagement consultant, what do you need from us to make sure that's supported? Is that providing mental health support when we run a session? Is that actually just being educated on kind of the issues, or what can we do?
I think you can do a lot of things. I think you can do those things and more. I think definitely from the beginning being educated around that, and consulting as well before you even go into that work, to see what the languages are, to see what the best way to approach it is. And obviously that's going to be hard because everyone's experiences are different. So then when you do have those engagement opportunities, having that kind of acknowledgement done that maybe there are people in this room that have these experiences, that there is support. I find that's been really helpful, and it's been acknowledged that people in this space have experienced what is being discussed, and it isn't an abstract concept, that it's a lived concept. So we really need to acknowledge that. And then if you don't have that experience, also acknowledging your limitations as well. I think that makes people feel a lot comfortable in saying that while I'm running this thing, I am open to learning from you as well. And I appreciate that I don't know everything and that my experience is different from yours. So please, I'm welcomed to your knowledge and to your experiences. That's been helpful for me.
Thanks, Akeer. I think I feel that what you just told me is really generous. So I really appreciate that. And I love this idea of whoever's the facilitator, I think it's like taking your ego out of it as well. Like it's not actually about you. So you kind of need to meet people where they're at. All right. So my other two. So Mehak, would you like to tell me about intersectionality and youth engagement?
Yeah, I think I might talk about intersectionality in terms of location, because I know that Ali and Akeer will cover a few other points. I think we do. Well, firstly, I want to acknowledge that we often do this. We bulk all young people into the same category, and it's not sort of news to anyone, but it is something we need to start to acknowledge as a whole sector that we do, and start to shift the approach to it. And that means, when we're sitting to plan and design our engagement activities, we come into it with a lens going like, okay, we're recognizing that we can't just go like, we did a youth consulting, I don't know how to say this word very well. We did a youth engagement thing, tick, like, let's not do that. Let's really question in our design process, which kind of young people are we getting to? Like, do they have access to the actual opportunity? Are they physically able to travel to that place? And which ones have we constantly gone back to, and which ones do we keep like forgetting to go to? So I think those are some questions that I keep in my mind as well, and I encourage other people to. And I'm going to talk about not only urban location, but also regional. So in terms of, if we talk about Melbourne, a lot of the things happen in the CBD, and that assumes that a young person has access to a bus, or a train or a car to get to the city, plus the time factor that people have spoken about already. So how do you create these place-based experiences where it's like, I just have to travel 10 minutes to get to be involved, for example. So having that place-based approach, so that location is not a barrier and should never be a barrier for what kind of things you access. And I know this happens in the Western suburbs as well. Like we often talk about Western suburbs being forgotten, Western suburbs not getting the same attention. And that's because what we feel is that it's a very surface level engagement. It's not like the deep, meaningful engagement that you might have if you're, for example, in the city. And I know this because I've gone to programs in the city, and then I've also gone to programs in the Western suburbs. And I feel the difference between the two kind of areas. And this is just urban or metro Melbourne. So I can't even begin to imagine how much harder it is for the people or young people who live in the regional parts of Victoria, feeling like, I was actually speaking to one of these very engaged young women recently who lives in, I think, Bendigo or Ballarat, one of the two, and was like, I have to get on a train for 4 hours every time I have to do an engagement. So Zoom has made it so much better for me. I feel like I can attend all these other things. And in my mind, I was like, 4 hours is a huge decision to make, to have to get out to come to CBD to do something. So I think location is something we need to be thinking about. And this approach of place-based is probably the way to go for me going into the future.
Yep, totally. All right, Ali, tell us about intersectionality and youth engagement.
There's so much that I'm hearing from Mehak and Akeer that I'm just really resonating with. And I think something that I would propose is this idea of we need to recognize that any sense of youth engagement, particularly looking at intersectionality of different issues, is fundamentally needing to have respect and mutual respect and equality at the heart of it. Because I think a lot of the problems that we have with young people is that we, as Mehak said, we treat them as this abstract, this idea of like young people as a, you know, whether it's like, you know, queer young people or migrant refugee young people, as though that says anything. And, you know, and just to give an example, like, you know, I made this point constantly in the multicultural space that, like, you know, I might be a young person, but I'm a second generation. My parents came to Australia from Lebanon during the Civil War in the 80s. And me being born here and raised here, my experience to a young person who is actually a refugee and migrant themselves is a completely different experience. And so whilst we have a shared migrant refugee experience, our lived experience is completely different. And we know that on an interpersonal level, like, to respect someone is to understand their unique value, their unique history. And yet when we kind of go to a group setting, we start to abstract. So I think that's fundamental. That's the first step, is really needing to have that mutual sense of respect. And then extension from that, what Mehak's talked about, is then a sense of, well, you know, if I had a colleague, I wouldn't ask them, I wouldn't make an unfair request of them. It's like, I expect you to come travel 4 hours to this consultation, or I'm going to pay you in a gift card. You know, as adults, we wouldn't accept this. You know, I'm not going to go 4 hours by train to a consultation to get like a Myers $50 gift card. Yet it's almost seen as acceptable. It's like, oh, it's a young person, it's okay. It's almost this sense of, I think it's not conscious, I think we're not conscious of, but it's a subconscious assumption that I'm doing you a favor as a young person. And by having that implicit, it's like there is an immediate level of, I don't think we're equals. And unfortunately, that's a really big reason why young people don't engage in the first place, or very quickly become disengaged being in the space, because they can feel that lack of good faith and equality. No one wants to be felt like they're not being treated as an equal. And I think something to add in the issue of intersectionality that I'm really passionate about is kind of the generational differences. And I think particularly during the challenges we're facing in our generation, many of us have faced the quote or the phrase that we've been hit with, you know, oh, young people are kind of always complaining, you know, you have it so lucky, you know, we went through this, we went through that. And I think that this negates the fact that every generation has had unique challenges. And I think it can't be understated the uniqueness of the challenges that young people in this generation are facing. I think particularly around employment, like, you know, Productivity Commission just 2-3 months ago released a report about youth employment in Australia, and the statistics are quite horrendous in terms of lack of job opportunities, lack of wage growth, which just stagnated, real wage growth for the last 20 years. And we say this and we don't recognize just how hard it is. And I think COVID has only made this worse. It's only exacerbated just how the fact that so many young people now can't get access jobs, are over-educating themselves to be able to be eligible for a job. You know, where once a bachelor was enough, now you need a master's, a PhD with 2 years of work experience, with an internship, speak 5 languages, had international experience. And even then, you can't have a job. You know, for me and my co-founder, Imana, that's exactly why we started Bridging Us, because we had done all of that and we couldn't find work despite having all of that. So we started Bridging Us in part out of desperation. And that's now, having the conversation with colleagues and friends now, that's even worse during COVID, because the most educated cohort of young people can't get work. And yet we can often hear this line of, oh, but, you know, young people always complaining. It's like, I think that's a part of intersectionality, and again, nuance and respect, is the ability to recognize the unique circumstances someone is in and to be able to support them, rather than saying, oh, but my time, we just worked hard and we got through it. It's like, yes, that's very right. And you had your unique challenges, just like my parents, my brother and sister, who are 15 years older, they had unique challenges. My parents had unique challenges. And it's not that's not to negate this. And it's this weird sense of, I suffered, so I can kind of negate your suffering because mine was. It's this weird comparison, rather than in reality, just to say, no, you have unique challenges. Let's understand them and let's work through them, because I think that only adds to the frustration that so many young people are feeling, just not heard and respected.
Can I quickly just add, Melissa? I love that Ali's covered all of this, and he's touched on it very briefly, but the difference I think that young people have today, as opposed to perhaps a few generations before us, is how highly connected we are through technology, through globalization. When you put out, for example, a job ad, let's just say this for an example, I'm not just up against my local street, for the local baker. Like, I'm up against the 7 billion people in the world, obviously exaggerating that number, but this idea that, we don't live in the same context as we used to, or as, young people, generations before us used to. And that needs to be accounted for in its intersectionality, because it also means that the identities we carry and the reflections we carry come from that lived, like, worldly experience. And the biggest example I often have is, I might be able to switch off momentarily from what's happening in my local area, but I can't, I have to go online to connect with my friends and family. So I can't switch off from what's happening around the world. And that is something that is constantly around us. It's really hard to not be engaged in it. Even your most, I don't want to say disengaged, but I'm going to say, the young people that you might call like disengaged or not connected, they're highly connected online. They know what's happening and they deeply care. So all of that needs to be considered when we're working with them, with young people's identities, even, and what kind of lens they bring to conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Mehak. And something I also thought was worth bringing up before, when you sort of had your response, I got a bit starstruck for a second, but I think something to be mindful is not only why you're engaging young people, but why you're engaging young people from a certain community. I think we need to be very aware of tokenism as well. So we've just had a question from Eileen Chang, who said, I think one of the barriers often encountered with youth engagement is the process of engagement, particularly from all levels of government, are too formalised and can be a bit too intimidating. Do you have any recommendations on how we can ease these structural barriers and meet people's communication and engagement needs? All right, who wants to kick off? I'm seeing some head nods.
I can start us off and then pass it on. I think honestly, every time you put out a call for interest or any kind of recruitment material, I think it's really useful. This is just very practical advice, to do a quick sweep through and see what's all the jargon words in here that people are not going to understand. And they'll be like, I did not understand that, so I'm already disengaged because I don't know what this means. And again, it's like to sweep through it again very practically and go like, what is the commitment I'm asking for from young people? Every time I put out a call out, I'm very clear. I'm like, this is the expectation that I'm asking from if you are engaging with this process. And there might be more. We're open to a discussion to it. Like, of course, you can't predict every single thing, but having kind of these guidelines on the expectation, the commitment, I think that's been quite practically useful. Yeah.
Ali or Akeer, did you have anything you wanted to jump in with about making?
I know for Akeer to go first.
Yeah.
I'm kind of having a think. I think particularly for people who work in the space and who have that power already, if I think about services that I've worked in, how we elicit feedback at that grassroots level from young people who access services, because maybe it isn't really about always having them at that higher level at that table, or maybe that's not always accessible. But if we are in our grassroots work eliciting feedback, eliciting young people's experiences and their voices and their stories in that everyday work, when those workers or those people who have power then get consulted, that information is kind of fed up. So it doesn't necessarily help young people get at that higher level of consultation and engagement, but it does meet them where they are accessing already, and always making sure that at all levels we're engaging young people and their experiences and their stories, and then consistently feeding that up into our work as well.
Ali, did you have any last things you wanted to add in?
Yeah, so just, I guess, briefly, three things that come to mind, or just rather an idea, is that we need to recognize that youth engagement is not a singular process. It doesn't happen at one point. It's multi. And the first part of that is actually, one, how do we communicate to young people that there is an opportunity for them to be engaged? Two, when they're in that opportunity, how meaningful is that opportunity? You know, is the language that they're using exclusive? Are they really having the ability to make an impact? The third part is actually then accountability, sense of a common concern that comes up with young people, but and also within the literature, is that happens, and then young people don't know what's happened with what they've done. So they don't know if it's been used, if it hasn't been used, and it may well be, but they don't know that. And so we need to recognize that at every stage, it's not just the, it's how do we communicate that opportunity for engagement? How do we make the engagement actually impactful? I feel empowered. I'm actually going to make a difference. And three, what's actually happened with the input that I've given? Because otherwise you have this common, you know, consultation engagement fatigue. It's like, well, I've been to so many consultations. I feel frustrated. I feel like I'm saying the same things. I don't know if they've done anything with it. And I think particularly with the communication, just letting opportunities. I remember talking to many councils I've worked with saying like, the fact that on your website, there's not a button. It's like, I have a concern in the community, like immediately click it. I remember saying once to one council I worked with that I had to Google youth engagement or youth participation and find it was like buried between links. It's like, that's one sign, not just youth engagement, broader community engagement. It's like, if it is not easy for your community to engage and to actually raise a concern, whether that's on your website, social media, whatever it is, you're not going to have a sincere level of input, because again, you're already blocking off from the very first stage. You're sending a signal. It's like, oh, well, we don't really want your input. And then those issues of then within that engagement and then post engagement will only make things harder, and you'll only have a higher attrition of young people moving forward.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Thanks.
just quickly, I know because Akeer needs to head off in a sec, but I just wanted to say, if you're talking about structural and systematic change, my question would be to say, how diverse in thought experience, lived experience is your team that's running that engagement? Because they will bring all of this stuff with them, right? Because they come with that lived experience. This is why it's so important to have that diversity. It's not just a buzzword. It's important to have diversity in teams and leadership, because it means that they embed it in the design process. So if you have young people on your team, this stuff is already going to start coming out. So that's the structural kind of change I think that's possible.
Great. Thanks, everyone. All right, well, we might move on to our next kind of part of the session. And there's been a couple of kind of finish times with this session that have been split, but we're going to push on till 1 p.m. So in terms of everyone in the audience, if you can stay with us, we'd love it. Otherwise, stay with us for the next, 5 or so minutes. But again, if you've got any questions for our great panel, please push them through. All right, so I guess our next question is about what's next for youth engagement. We know that young people are being disproportionately affected by COVID. We knew about the challenges young people were experiencing before with employment and all kinds of things. And Ali did a great job of kind of outlining those. My question is going to be, where are we going next? How can youth engagement be improved? And Akeer, would you like to kick us off before you have to head off?
That is a great question. I definitely do value the face-to-face engagement that we do outside of COVID. I think it's great that we meet in person, but I've also seen how the internet has really obviously opened up that space for young people. As Mehak was saying, that issue around location, issues around, employment, like being able to actually engage during a lunch break, as opposed to having to take 2 hours of your time. So I think embracing technology as we move forward, I think that we shouldn't see that as a bad thing, and really using that to continue to engage young people. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Akeer. And Ali, I'm seeing some head nodding. What does this look like moving forward?
If I'm able to share this, so at the start of the month, the Victorian government announced the opening up consultations for a new youth strategy moving forward. And I think during COVID, unfortunately, I've been quite a sad, cynical place around youth engagement. I think just because I'm seeing my peers and the challenges we're facing, and worrying, is this going to be another tokenistic exercise? And the reason I say is because for youth engagement to be improved moving forward, it needs to fundamentally recognize that we have a status quo at the moment where young people are not seen and treated as equal citizens who actually have something to contribute. The common term used in literature is this view of young people as citizens in the making. They're not yet able to contribute, as opposed to what Mehak saying before. I hear that young people actually have expertise, they have insight to provide now. They don't have to reach a certain stage here and be seen, oh yeah, your insights are valuable now. And I think that needs to be the fundamental change in beliefs first, I think. Otherwise, we're going to have more and more disengagement young people who feel that they're not represented, they're not valued, they're not seen as valuable members of society. And then moving forward, I think Akeer's touched upon it really well, this idea that we need to then use, and as well as Mehak, we need to use the means of communication, the language that young people are using to actually engage with them. I think that, the golden rule of whatever you explain, if you can't explain it to a 12-year-old, then you don't understand it. And I think this is regardless whether it's policy, mental health. I think it's a fundamental rule for everyone. And I really resonate with what Mehak was saying before, reading 60 pages. I've read through documents in areas I would consider myself well versed in, and I have no clue what the document is talking about. I've controlled F the document to try to find just terms I know are useful, just to find out what's relevant for the document. And that's us as supposed experts in this field. What would the ordinary citizen or the lay person think? And I think we need to remove these barriers, including the language we use, the means of communication, the technology we're using, to actually bring more people into the table to actually discuss this, and to remove this idea that we have to use complicated language to talk about something which is complex. It's not at all. And if you can't explain that in simple terms, then you don't understand what it is you're trying to communicate, and no one's going to understand you either.
Thanks, Ali. And Mehak, what's next?
I have to say, I just want to preface what I'm going to say by saying I'm very hopeful. I'm a very hopeful, optimistic person, and it's placed like opportunities like this panel and this whole conference that to me bring hope. Like I think it's like I'm sure that it's possible to have a very robust engagement process with young people, and one that's meaningful and one that continues on. So I think what's next is meaningful change. And if there's like 50 odd people in this conference, that's 50 odd people on this panel. That's 50 odd people who really care about doing something. And to me, that's not a small number. That's like deep engagement, a deep impact is possible. I think I just want to echo what Akeer and Ali have already said. Young people are not just there to kind of receive all the time. They're not there just, I think we need to change this sort of savior mentality. I know that's used in a different context, but when they're not just kind of there to be saved, but young people are partners in that conversation. Young people are partners in creating change. And a really good example is, I've seen experiences where we run youth forums to understand the issue. And the issue hasn't changed. I think the nuance might change, and it's good to have your finger on the pulse, if you like, of what's happening. But then you also need opportunities where young people are brought in to create the solutions. And we know there's an appetite for that. I know that because there are so many youth-led organizations that I'm around, at least 300 that I know at the top of my mind. So there's a pulse for wanting to create solutions. Let's bring them in that solution generation part of the process as well. That's kind of what's next for me, is we're not just there asking what's wrong, but we're asking what's possible.
I love that optimism. So thank you. And I love that being kind of brought as an energy to this conference and to the work that I do. And I think it's great. A question doesn't really fall in line with our question exactly, but I guess I want to hear more about that idea of co-design and how to do it well. I think that it's easy to kind of set up the meeting with young people at the beginning of the strategy, but it's a little bit already kind of established. So what does that look like? Is it employment? Are there other options? Oh, seeing some thinking. Good co-design. Bad co-design. I'll take any co-design.
I think a quick point I'll add is that we need to recognize that co-design has to happen at every stage. So the phrase like this is exploration of what the problem is needs to be co-designed. Mapping of the solutions needs to be co-designed. Implementing, co-designed. Evaluating, co-designed. Redesigned, co-designed. I've just designed a lot in that sentence. But again, it's this idea of, if that doesn't happen, that sense of we're in this together does not occur. And then you have the sense of we're not equal in this venture. So why should I bother being involved? I think that's really a key aspect of co-design in terms of actually being part of every side of the process. I think within those steps of the process is then recognizing, okay, how do we actually, this is my concerns, is your, so as a young person, this is your concern as like decision maker or a staff member in this organization or policy maker, these are your concerns. How do we come in and create something new rather than actually trying to convince each other I'm right? Because again, the idea is young people have insights to provide. They're often at the forefront of the issues that they're experiencing with their lived experience. Those in organizations have technical expertise that is valuable and is needed. And so we can't have it as like, I'm right, and I just want to kind of get your rubber stamp endorsement, vice versa. For either young people or decision makers, either way, is actually we need to come together because together we'll identify a problem that we actually may not know about yet. Because I'll express an issue, you'll express something. Oh, actually, this seems to actually be the structural issue now that we've talked about our perspectives that we didn't actually recognize individually. So this concept of the sum of the parts is greater. And the second thing, then you're going to actually have effective, sustainable solutions because one, you've identified from both the grassroots and the strategy level what the problem is, and you've developed the solution for that. That will now actually be feasible from an organizational perspective, but will actually have greater buy-in from the young people in the community because they've been a part of that and they know this is actually going to address their problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Agree 100% in terms of like all parts of the process is co-designed, not just the end, which is often what happens where people, well, that's not co-design, then that's just the consulting tick boxy thing. But I also want to say that think about some of those principles of co-design, right? The terminology is a bit newer, but the principle is that you're bringing various experiences to the table to find a common ground and find a common solution. And the more polarized we get as a society, which is the truth, we are getting more polarized. If you watched Social Dilemma on Netflix, you will see the statistics up there. But the whole point of co-design is bringing those polar opposites to the decision making and saying, look, the truth is we have to share the planet. So how do we share the solutions? We have to share the planet. So how do we share these problems and experiences? And that, I think that is the only way we're going to go forward in a meaningful kind of long-term outcome way. So I think keeping those principles at core is really important. So then you're not just kind of like checking off a list of like, now we've done co-design, this is the next step, this is the next step. It's about the value, it's about the human at the end of the day, who is in the room and how are they feeling.
Yeah, totally. I'm hearing a really great mix of user-centered design, which is actually designing for the people, who are going to be experiencing these policies, as well as, working collaboratively towards a common goal. I think we definitely need more of that. So we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A that I forgot that we had, the magic of all the screens. So from Rebecca, do you have any opinions, experiences of youth councils? What are some things to consider if we're looking at a new model? And what types of an approach would you suggest when scoping the new model? I'm thinking co-design, but does anyone have any ideas about youth council models? Go for it.
I'm happy to again start only because I've had really deep experience with local governments. I think, so I'll talk about some personal lived experience about it. I was part of a bunch of committees on local council level, and one of them was very much promoted as, this committee, when you come together every year, we pick a topic and we work on a solution together. That did not actually happen because there were so many changes with, first of all, the youth workers. We were like, do we have a meeting? Do we not have a meeting? Because no one really gave it that much attention. So if you don't get that, love and attention from the people who are opening the room for us, why will I come with my enthusiasm? So that's a very practical thing. But it also didn't happen because there was just the investment wasn't there, not only on a financial level, but on we really care about this committee doing something. That vibe wasn't there. And then I moved on to another level, and when I was talked to with me about it, I felt this is the next level of advocacy, the next level of engagement. And I got involved in that council committee. And, you know, in my mind, I was like, oh, we're actually going to look at policy now and see how to create systemic change. That was how it was talked to me about. And I went in there with all that enthusiasm and excitement, and it ended up being the exact same thing. We were told, come up with a project idea, a small project idea that this, you know, 6 of you can run. Here's apply for this $2,000 grant. And I was like, I just did this for 3 years and we got nowhere. And this was the next level where I was going to be involved in creating meaningful embedded solutions that will outlive me. And it didn't happen. So I felt like the expectations were set and then you didn't meet them, and there was no way to hold you accountable because the power dynamic was such, right? It was like, you are giving us a space, we should be grateful that we're even allowed in this space. That power dynamic meant that you couldn't raise these things. So that was my experience of local council. And I think if we're looking for models, I think we need to look into I personally think we need to look into like the user experience sector or the design sector, because they put the people at the center and they let them lead it, or the co-design experience. That is how I think the models we should be looking at. Sorry, I've got background noise.
That's all right. Hearing another youngish person in the background. Yeah, I'm also like hearing legislation change. Like, let's give these youth councils some power. But Ali or Akeer, tell us, do you have any ideas about an improved model for youth councils and how they can be representative as well?
Yeah, I think representation is massive. The ones that I've been involved with, maybe not councils per se, but maybe committee groups or working groups or advisory groups, is that, again, it is the same young people. It's the same young people who are the school captains and whatnot. So again, making sure that we are communicating to that wider audience of young people. And I have definitely experienced what Mehak is saying around being put into this program and having this great idea about what you're going to do, and then that not eventuating because that investment isn't there. I think also that they're usually surprised at how well thought out our ideas are, and maybe a little bit hesitant to actually follow through because they're like, oh, we didn't actually expect such a robust idea that requires a lot of buy-in. So I think coming with that high expectation that these young people have a lot of experience and have a lot of ideas, and that if you're actually willing to buy into that it's genuine and that you're going to see that through.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think bigger than young people only having this $2,000 limit of what they can think of, and start big and then see what can be delivered and continue working from there. All right, we've got 2 questions that I want to squeeze in, and then we're going to finish up right on time, everyone. So from Andrew Coulson, what kind of compensation should be available to young people when engaging them, or are incentives better? I think this also crosses over with a little bit of what we heard around, you know, what are you kind of compensating people for? Is it travel? Is it loss of employment because of coming to that engagement? So compensation or incentives? Oh,
yeah, definitely in terms of, you know, paying young people for their time, I think it's a good thing. It is valuable, but I think compensating in what Dad have mentioned around having our work realized, and in that if we are going to put in that much work, that the compensation is an outcome. You know, that we've actually been really committed to this process and we're really passionate about this work. So communicating those outcomes and us seeing that work be realized would be awesome.
So that feedback loop at a minimum, if not actually doing the
at
thing.
the minimum. Yeah.
Ali?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with Akeer. And I think she's nailed it perfectly on the head. There's a level of compensation, but there's also a sense of, is what I am doing making an impact? And I think, again, I would think of it as like, think of yourself as if you're an executive of a company or you're a board member. It's like, A, are you willing to do that for free? And 2, kind of what Mehak was saying, it's like, it's weird. We wouldn't go to a board and say, oh, okay, you have an idea. Now we want you to design it, implement it, do it for free. You know, the point of a board or an executive team is to oversee and to hold the organization to account. Yet it's kind of a weird, even, you know, many organizations tout that, oh, this youth council, youth committee is actually on equal level as the board. Yet the board wouldn't be asked to do this. Yet, you know, young people are almost strategy, implementation all in one. And then, as Akeer said, then often surprised when they've come up with quite a robust comprehensive idea, and then again, it's they're subject to the will of the organization whether or not they want to implement that or not. So I think Akeer's perfectly put it. It's compensation and impact or accountability have to go hand in hand, because the sense of, am I being compensated for what I'm doing? As anyone, and as I said, would anyone do this for free or get paid in a gift card? As an example, it's a common problem in the sector. And two, would anyone do their work where you're kind of asked to do so much more than what your role is actually is entitled to be, or if your work didn't actually have an impact that you could control, and you weren't kept in the loop as to what your actions have. Again, it's always it's golden rule: do unto others as you want done to yourself. And I feel like if we wouldn't do work for free, we wouldn't do work that we felt wasn't meaningful, and wouldn't do work where we felt we actually had control over the outcome, we wouldn't do it. So why should we expect young people to do the same?
I think I just want to add on to that compensation bit. I can understand that this sector is stretched. I've heard about it. I've seen it as well. I'm talking about the youth sector, by the way. I understand how stretched that's constantly. We don't have funding. We're applying for funding, and it's not something that I'm dismissing. I think it's about, when you do create your budget, have you already accounted for that? Have you already accounted for the fact that you want to be paying young people? And I think, I don't remember the question exactly, but I think what's really important is if you start to recognize young people's lived experience as expertise, you then pay for it. If you're getting someone to speak on a panel about their lived experience about something, that's a lot of emotional labor that after the panel, they have to go and sit, in a room and think, wow, I said a lot about, I've put myself out there. That was a very vulnerable experience. That is a lot of work. And so that's what you're paying for. You're not just paying for someone to come and tell you some dot points. You're paying for them to bring their full self to a conversation. So I think that, again, it's that attitude change, which Ali mentioned a bit earlier, that mindset shift of how we approach young people and their expertise. I want to quickly add on a point I was talking about before, because I need to be explicit about it. But young people should not just be in youth services, council committees or youth services advisory committees. We need to actually be in all these other areas too. Housing matters to me because I want to live in a house one day by myself. Roads matter to me because I use the bus, I use the car. So please embed us in all the other sectors as well, not just the youth services. So I just want to make that explicit point.
I love that. So we're running at the gate with our time. And so I think we might need to wrap it up there, even though I have so many other questions. So I want to thank all of you so much for your generosity. I've loved it, had a great time. So thank you all. And for sharing a really fresh perspective. I always feel really energized working with people like yourselves. So thank you so much. For everyone in our audience, today's session has been recorded, so please sign up to our newsletter to get involved, and you can get recordings from this session and others. And the other thing is, there's some other really great sessions. So I would join one of my friends and colleagues who's running a street walk tomorrow. It'll take you off Zoom and get you to appreciate your neighbourhood. And also one of my other friends and colleagues, Denise, is running a session about a community development project we worked on last year that will just bring lots of joy to my heart. And it's a really different way about thinking about engagement. So otherwise, we'll see you all next time. And thanks, everyone. See you later.